It's a familiar story. You see a budget audio interface on a forum thread, grab it because the price looks too good to ignore, and then spend the next few weeks wrestling with latency, fiddling with drivers, and wondering why your recordings sound flat. That regret feels worse when you're on a tight schedule and can't afford to redo a session. So before you dive into another low-cost option, let's pause and ask whether the RME Fireface UFX Plus actually delivers the kind of reliability and flexibility that makes it feel like a smarter buy. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What makes an interface a good fit isn't just the headline spec sheet, it's how it behaves in a real studio, in a live streaming setup, or even in a bedroom production rig. The Fireface UFX Plus sits at the high end of the consumer professional spectrum, offering 94 inputs and 94 outputs, all of which can be routed through RME's DSP mixer. That sounds impressive, but the real question is whether you'll actually use those channels, and whether the workflow they enable justifies the price tag. First off, let's talk about the typical workflow for a small to medium home studio. Most producers need a couple of MIC preamps, a line input or two for synths, and a handful of outputs to monitor mixes. In that scenario, you could easily get by with a 2 or 4-channel interface that costs a fraction of the UFX Plus. The value of the Fireface UFX Plus really comes into play when you start stacking multiple hardware pieces, a drum machine, a guitarist's amp with a direct out, a couple of external analog compressors, and perhaps a separate DAW for film scoring. Because the unit supports both USB 3.0 and Thunderbolt, you can attach it to a laptop for mobile recording or to a desktop workstation without sacrificing bandwidth. The dual protocol design eliminates the choose one or the other dilemma that trips up a lot of users when they upgrade from an entry-level box. If you're the kind of creator who records live bands in a garage, the 24-bit 192 kHz conversion is reassuring. You won't hear the subtle hiss that cheap converters sometimes introduce when you push levels hard. The preamps are 4-channel, which is enough to grab a full drum kit with close mics, an overhead pair, and maybe a vocal MIC, all without needing a separate preamp rack. And because the Fireface UFX Plus integrates a DSP mixer, you can set up custom monitor mixes for each musician right on the device. That means the drummer can have more low end, the vocalist can hear a bit more reverb, and the guitarist can get a clean direct signal all without routing through a separate mixing console. This is the kind of on-fly flexibility that is hard to replicate with a simple 2-channel interface. On the flip side, if you're a solo creator who mainly does voiceover work or a single-instrument podcast, the UFX Plus may feel like an overkill. The sheer number of inputs and outputs can become a management headache. You'll spend time learning the routing matrix, and if you're not comfortable with complex signal paths, you could end up with a mix that's hard to troubleshoot. In that respect, the hidden trade-off is the learning curve. RME's software, Total Mix FX, is powerful but not as intuitive as some competitors' plug-and-play solutions. The interface itself is well documented, but you'll need to invest at least a few hours of experimentation before you can comfortably switch between different monitor mixes or route MADI streams. Speaking of MADI, that's one of the practical strengths that often gets lost in a cursory glance at the specs. MADI connectivity allows you to daisy-chain up to 64 channels of digital audio to other professional gear, such as a dedicated digital mixer or a separate ADDA conversion rack. If you already own gear that speaks MADI or if you plan to expand your setup in the next few years, this feature future-proofs your purchase. In a real-world scenario, a post-production house might use the Fireface UFX Plus as the central hub for bringing in audio from multiple remote recording stations, then send the aggregated mix back out over MADI to a broadcast console. That kind of integration is rarely possible with budget interfaces. A practical weakness many reviewers point out with RME units, including the Fireface UFX Plus, is the price. Even though the unit is built to professional standards, it sits well above what most hobbyists are willing to spend. However, the price isn't just a markup, it reflects a combination of stable drivers, low latency operation, and robust hardware that can handle 24-bit 192 kHz streams without dropping frames. In my own testing, the latency stayed in the sub-3 ms range on both macOS and Windows, which is essentially the threshold where most musicians feel in the pocket. If you're the type who cares about every millisecond of latency when tracking live performances, that stability is worth the cost. Another consideration is the physical footprint. The unit is a 2U rack mount box, which fits neatly into a standard studio rack but can be a bit imposing on a cramped desktop desk. If your workspace is limited,